My current role at Fountain is Managing Director and Finance Director, so I'm responsible for trying to keep the show on the road and also for the day-to-day reporting to head office. I started working for the company in 1993. I applied for a job of Finance Director from the Financial Times. I had probably the worst interview that anybody could ever have. My heel fell off on the way to the interview and I limped in 20 minutes later. So it was with some amazement that 2 months later I actually got the job of Finance Director. And I was Finance Director here for many years until the studio was bought by another company and I moved on to the other company. And then we were bought back by the original owners and I moved back in as Managing Director. I had an involvement with New Malden, which was the original studio that Fountain set up. When I first joined as Finance Director, they didn't have a dedicated finance person and they'd bought Fountain Wembley and they were running both studios and they needed somebody full-time to do the finance. So I was very involved with New Malden up until 1999 when it closed. My time was spent between both places. The company was originally formed in 1985 when they acquired the New Malden studio, which used to be a youth centre in New Malden, and they set it up as a studio then, and that's when the company started, and it was part of the Avesco group at that time. When Fountain started in 1985 in New Malden, it was probably the first one-stop shop studio because they had a small studio and they also had post-production, and it was the first time people could shoot a show and then go into post, be it sound or editing. It had its own restaurant and it was probably the first self-contained building where people could shoot and edit and make a programme all in one go. The development of Wembley came about because New Malden was too small for what it needed. They looked at doing expansion plans, they looked at extending the studio, extending the galleries, and then all of a sudden Wembley came on the market because it had gone into administration from Limehouse, and the decision was taken that we would buy Wembley rather than try and extend New Malden, which would have been a struggle and also would not have provided anything like the size here. So pound for pound, it was about the same cost. Extending New Malden or buying Wembley were about the same. Maybe not in the end once we kitted Wembley out, but that was the decision that was taken at the time. Once they knew that Wembley was up for sale, it had to be a very quick decision because it was in the hands of the administrators, so it was whoever could come up with the money first, so it was a very sudden decision, yes. When we first took over Wembley, it was the studio standing in a sea of mud, which extended over the original lot, the old film lot that was here from back in the day. And we utilised the spare space as a car park, but it was just mud. And then the retail development occurred probably 2 or 3 years later. Fountain has always been in the unique position of being an independent facility that has no affiliation to a broadcaster, and that's been a plus and a minus. It's obviously a minus because we don't have shows that automatically come through to us, and has probably been the biggest downside in terms of utilisation. But our independence means that anybody feels free to come here, so you're not within the constraints of a larger organisation. And I believe it has made Fountain much more flexible, so we can do what the client wants rather than what the broadcaster wants. And there was a time when we were semi-attached to a production company when when the parent company owned part of Celador. We were quite concerned at the time that it would put other production companies off for coming here because would we prefer Celador over them? And in the event, it never proved to be an issue. So it's been a mixed blessing. The company over the years since its inception, I can only speak from 1993 onwards, the ethos and the culture hasn't changed. It's always been a can-do, yes, we can do it, anything to help the client organisation, and that is a tribute to Julian Kosick, who was the first managing director. The shows have changed, they've got bigger and bigger. When we were first here, we never did any live shows. I can remember discussions about, is it worth getting a live link put in the building, because we're only going to use it once or twice a year. Self-evidently, that has changed completely, but I do believe the company has kept its culture over the years as a can-do centre of excellence. My personal ambition has been for it to always be the best, to do as well as it possibly can, and to make sure that the team are well looked after. Professional, I've gone with the flow. I've come and gone. When we took the site over in the 90s, shows like The X Factor, probably starting with Pop Idol, starting with Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, were not in anybody's horizons, I don't believe, and it took a while for us to establish a reputation within the industry for doing bigger shows, and that was a real struggle in the outset, because people said, well, who are you? You've only run a little studio down in New Malden. How can you do a bigger show? I would like to say there was a plan when it was bought, but as with everything Fountain, it just happened. During the 1990s, we hosted a very wide range of shows, and that was the nature of the shows at the time. They weren't the mega shows that they are now, so we did many things. And we started out at New Malden, we did Ready Steady Cook. We started out with Ready Steady Cook in New Malden. The celebrity version transferred over here. We had MasterChef, we had Food and Drink in the early days, so we were the bake-off place of choice at the time. And then we had things like Esther, Hearts of Gold, Talking Telephone Numbers. What we were actually doing was a lot of shows back to back. So you didn't have the situation where a studio is full of one show for a long block of time. We were turning around 4 or 5 shows a week because they were smaller and we were doing overnights. So it was a very different landscape at that time. I suppose Who Wants to Be a Millionaire was arguably the start of those mega shows. We did the pilots, we did the first series. We weren't able to continue doing it because ITV were using it strategically and striping it over a week or 2 weeks. And we never knew, they never knew when they were going to be making it. So we self-evidently couldn't keep the studio open for them on the off chance. So they moved at that point. And then we started to kick in with things like Pop Idol and subsequently X Factor and Britain's Got Talent. All the while doing other smaller shows like The Cube, Rory Bremner, a variety of different shows, but it has moved far more to the big stage. I think the TV industry is going to miss not only Fountain, but other centres of excellence like Teddington, Wood Lane, places like that where they are dedicated television facilities. It's not going to be the same for them in Four Wallers with OB trucks, and it's a shame that people don't appreciate the excellence that there is in long established studios, and I think they are going to miss it. But it's a changing generation. We're now got people going out, you know, reporters doing the camera and the reporting and the sound themselves. It's just the way the industry is going, but it's a loss of craft, not only from Fountain, but other places as well. And that's a shame, but things move on, I guess. I'm obviously desperately sad. We are a victim of London land prices, not anything else. I believe that we could have continued for years. However, we know that there is going to be more investment needed when 4K comes in, or whatever the format is that eventually comes in, and there are pressures on budgets the whole time now. Production companies are having smaller and smaller budgets, unless you're Bake Off. And it's always going to be hard work. So the actual decision from a head office point of view, they're a public company, they had to do it. I think it's a loss to the area. I think local businesses are going to suffer. It's a loss to the industry. And I don't know where people are going to be going, but they'll find a way around. They always have. So it's desperately sad, but it is what it is. There are a number of memorable moments. I think walking in the front door one day and being handed a chimpanzee to hold for a while was one of them. I always have what I call my insurance company moments, which are, as an accountant, I could be working for an insurance company and this wouldn't happen if I was in an insurance company. I think probably we did the girly show for a while, and I was sitting in my office and Julian Cosick screamed across the corridor, "They cannot do that." And there was a lesbian rock band in who were stark naked except for gaffer tape and suspenders, and they actually spent the day walking around the building like that. So it was quite an interesting day, and I happened to have a whole load of Brent councillors coming to see me that day for a committee meeting, so I did ask them to try and lock the band in a dressing room while I got them through the building. That's probably a standout moment.